Hello, friends. How are you? How's things? How's life? How's the world in your space, wherever that is? Hope it's good. Our friend California Chris left a comment the other day um, that I really want to talk about, and it's about music. He specifically said this is a good discussion topic, and I agree. So I'm just going to read kind of what he wrote here. I might summarize some of it because it is a long comment. He says, for almost a century, every decade had a fresh new style of music that seemed to define the entire culture of that decade. 50s had the malt shop, rock and roll, hop. 60s, peace and love. 70s, anti-war. 80s, I don't know how to describe it, but you know it. 90s, the greatest decade for music, hard rock, rap, hip-hop, etc. 2000s had new metal and a lot of fusion. Then it just went stale since the early 2000s. I feel like there really hasn't been any culture defining overall tone or flavor. What are your thoughts? Do you agree or disagree? Or is there any hope that this comes back? I'm worried that the globalization of everything is making everything more generic overall, less culturally defining, less unique. I don't know. I want that almost tangible change back. I would hard disagree. If anything, I think that globalization has made us more unique. And what I mean by that is, while in America you could loosely define these generations as the Beatles defined the '60s, whatever. Hair metal defined the '80s with synthwave, and you could loosely put like this was the big defining moment that everybody started dressing like those people, whatever. In America, that's kind of true, but that's also kind of true for a very specific age range of that generation. Grown-ups weren't wearing the clothes of the 80s. There were some, obviously. But by and large, you're talking about youth culture of that generation. Because if you look at, if you asked my parents what the music of the 80s was, they would say, I don't know, I didn't listen to it. It wasn't their thing, right? They didn't care. So youth culture is a definition. You could say that that's how I would describe that. And I do not think that the current state of globalization has made that more generic. In fact, I would say that what you're describing is the generification. In the 80s you had to be a hair metal band or a synth pop band. In the 90s, you had to be grunge and hip hop. In the 2000s, you had those were the bands that made it, and so that's what you had to be generic enough to fit that mold. What I see right now is a return to a sort of localization or a sequestering. The reason that you feel that way. The reason that you feel that the 50s had their thing, the 60s had their thing, even the 30s and the 20s and whatever, is because of globalization. Or not necessarily globalization, but media defined those things, right? The reason the 60s became the Beatles' 60s is not because that was the movement. It's because that's what the news told us the movement was. That's what popular media put on a pedestal and said, this is what is the thing. And everybody went, okay. And they went along with it. If you go back to pre-television, specifically, or pre-radio, there is no defining, what is it? What is the thing? There isn't one. That's how I feel we're going back to, which I am all for. I do not want the generification. And the interesting thing now is, whereas if you go back to, say, the 1800s, there really isn't pop music yet. There is just whatever music happens to be near you. That's the music that you listen to. And so if you were in the East Coast, if you were in New York City, that might be classical, because that's the music that's coming over from Germany. That's the music that's coming, from the Western world. People are listening to this classical orchestral music. But if you travel west, you might be hearing honky-tonk piano. You might be hearing, just folk music, singer-songwriter stuff. The interesting thing is that wasn't a choice. I mean, I guess maybe you could have moved west to have more Western music in your life, but that was typically a byproduct. The music that you listened to was the music that was around you. Today, you get to choose. You get to look at all of the streaming platforms, look at all of the forums, websites, Facebook groups, TikTok threads, whatever you call, I don't know what they're called, lanes, I don't know whatever, you get to look at what you want to look at. You're not forced to, well, hair metal's the thing when I turn on the radio, that's my option. That was the world that I grew up in. You turned on the radio and you had classic rock, whatever that meant at that time. You had country western, whatever that meant at that time. You had pop, and then you had this other station that could maybe play some cool stuff that you hadn't heard. And those were your four choices. You really didn't have any other choices. I mean, I guess you could also, let's not minimize, like soul stations, or in this area we had, like a Christian radio. We had maybe like an easy listening. So there was maybe 6 or 7 different things you could listen to, and that was it. That was your choice. So even then, in the 80s, you were still kind of restricted by location because, national syndication wasn't really a thing. You could listen to Casey's Top 40, which would be, I don't know when that came out. Was that a weekend thing where you could hear like what the nation was listening to? That was like a syndicated thing. But for the most part, you were hearing what listeners in your area wanted to hear, as prescribed by the radio station, as prescribed by advertisers, as whatever. Like there was just you heard what was in your area. Along comes MTV, makes a huge change to that. Suddenly, everybody's listening to the same stuff, like you described. 90s was like this. You're listening to what's on MTV, I guess, and maybe VH1, and maybe BET, and maybe CMT. Like, you were listening to what's on those stations, but you didn't have a whole lot of control. And then along comes the internet, and suddenly you can listen to what you want to listen to. And then it took us a while to get discovery of types of music. Like, I want to listen to this type of music, and now suddenly you can find years worth of that type of music, whereas before you might have a few albums that you could find at your local record store or whatever. I much prefer the current state of music, in that I get to hear what I want to hear, not what other people have prescribed for me. Part of that is I'm personally curating my listening. There are still algorithms, there are still playlists, there are still people trying to like introduce you to the music they want you to listen to, and there are still people being paid to do that. They're being offered incentives by labels or artists to play their music. It's not necessarily to their taste, but they're going to play it because they're getting paid to play it. They're getting paid to introduce you to it. That's still a product of this scope. But ultimately, I'm not currently being restricted to the music that other people force upon me, or just, I'm also not being restricted to the music that my friends own. Like, when I was a teenager, and I had my 10 tapes and the copies of the 10 tapes that my friends owned or whatever. So these were the 30 albums I could listen to, or I could listen to what's on the 5 radio stations in my area. I prefer the current version, and I definitely think that it is not a global genericisms. I think quite the opposite. I think that there are a huge selection of genres of music right now. And I want that to stay. I don't want 10,000 pop punk bands, pop western bands, whatever. Like, I would much rather have pockets that I can slip into and go, oh, I can find music here and I can find music there, and I'm not restricted to just what's in my area. Now, I do miss the days of everybody listening to the same thing and talking about it and being excited about it and learning that a new album's coming out from a band we haven't heard for 5 years or whatever. I do miss that. That was a fun community to be a part of. But those communities still exist. You just have to find them now. They're not your local friends and neighbors because we're not all listening to the same thing. If you want to be a part of the punk community, you have to go seek that out. If you want to be a part of the bluegrass community, you have to go seek that out. If you know, whatever your thing is, you got to go find those people. Those people still exist, and those groups still exist, and those communities still exist. You just got to put a little bit of work into it. It's not so much a let's meet up on the street and share tapes, which I also miss. Okay, that's my old man take on all of that. What do you guys think? What do you think about the current state of music? I do wish discovery was a little easier without being so algorithmic. I wish that I could find music a little easier that I'm interested in without being spoon-fed. But maybe that's what record shops were for, and maybe we'll go back to that model. I have heard that CDs are on the comeback, so we shall see. What do you think? You should let me know in the comments. While you're down there, please like the video. Please subscribe if you haven't. We're growing. I want to keep growing. I'm very much enjoying that. I very much appreciate you watching the video and just being here. And I appreciate you giving me thoughts and topics to talk about. So please continue doing that. I will see you again on Monday. Today's 1,000 plus little things happy, successful people do differently. These are all short. We are learning 20 things to stop doing to others. I love this. Number 1, stop holding grudges. Grudges are a waste of perfect happiness. I agree, but I also think that it's perfectly fine to forgive, but hold accountable. Meaning that I'm not holding a grudge, but I'm also not treating you as if you're innocent. That's okay. It's okay to be mindful of a person's previous behaviors, but don't hold the grudge. That's fine.